It's all about knitting toe-up socks on flexible double-pointed needles with this tutorial. So grab some sock yarn, the pattern, and your knitting needles, and let's knit a pair of toe-up socks. Hey nerdy knitter, Tanya here. I'm a certified knitting instructor and a master hand knitter, and I believe knitting's a form of self-care. You can take time for yourself and your creative pursuits and hobbies and still create beautiful garments that you love to wear. And this video is all about knitting socks from toe to cuff using flexible double-pointed needles. We'll walk through every step of the process from casting on to binding off and everything in between. So grab some sock yarn, your flexible DPNs, and the pattern, which you'll find linked down below. And let's go to the overhead and take a look at the sock and the supplies we'll need and start knitting. Let's talk supplies. Of course, the first thing we need to knit a pair of socks is our sock yarn. I'm using a yarn called Static, which is a self-patterning yarn from Knit Picks. It's fingering weight yarn. 1 skein of yarn should be absolutely plenty for most socks, unless you have a very large or wide foot. You might need more, but in general, 1 skein of 100 grams of yarn should be enough for a pair of socks. Now, this particular yarn is 75% superwash wool, 25% nylon. And along with the yarn, we're going to need knitting needles. And for this tutorial, I'm going to be using flexible DPNs. They come in a set of 3. Unlike double pointed needles, which are usually 4 or 5 needles, we divide our sock in half, and we can put the instep on one needle and the heel on the other, and we knit with the third. So it's sort of a combination of like 2 circulars and DPNs. This is sort of the marriage of those 2 things. If you're used to DPNs, but you always get a little confused when you're working a sock on 3 needles, this method is a nice option because it equally divides that sock in half, and it's easy to tell where you're at in the sock pattern. We're also going to need some stitch markers. So we're going to need a locking stitch marker so we can lock it right onto our sock as we're knitting, so we know where the beginning of round is. We're also going to need 6 other stitch markers through the course of the sock. As we're knitting along, there's different areas we're going to need some stitch markers, so we'll need 6 of them all together. And then of course for finishing, you'll need some scissors or yarn snips and also a tapestry needle to weave in ends and finish our picot bind off edge. Before we start knitting, let's take a look at the sock itself. This is what we're knitting. We are starting at the toe with a Turkish cast on. Right down here at the bottom, that is a really super simple method for casting on just a few number of stitches for a closed cast on. So it looks really seamless right there. Then we're going to work the toe. We're doing sort of a rounded wedge toe shape. We're going to start so it's a bit rounded. We're going to work increases on every round. And then after a little bit, we'll stop and work them on every other round to give us that sort of wedge shape, but a bit rounded. We're going to use yarn overs for this toe, but we're going to close them up so they're not going to be like making eyelet holes along the sides right here. And then we have a lace pattern across the top of the sock, just for a little interest. This colorway is very Easter egg-like. And then for the heel, we're going to be doing a mini gusset. Right here, you can see we've increased some stitches, and then after the heel, we're going to decrease them away. Now this is a nice addition to a short row heel. If the short row heel feels a little tight across your instep, we're going to add extra stitches, and it will help give you a little more fabric in this area where that diagonal area from the bottom of your heel up over the foot and the instep. Sometimes that short row heel can feel a little too snug right there. So adding a gusset gives us some extra stitches. So along with that mini gusset, we're going to be working a short row heel. The short rows we're using for this are just the simple wrap and turn. That seems like the introduction for most knitters is wrap and turn short rows. They're very simple to work. We'll walk through each part of that. And then the leg of the sock, I prefer shorty socks, so mine are pretty short. I pretty much finished once I finished decreasing all those gusset stitches away. That was high enough for a shorty sock. But of course you can adjust and keep knitting the leg of the sock for as long as you want it to be. And then we're going to finish with a little picot folded edge right here, which is very, very simple to do. Just some rounds of stockinette, some eyelet rounds, and then a little more stockinette, and then we sew it down on the inside. Now, if you don't want a picot edge, we have an option to do like a plain folded hem without the little picot decorative top. Instead, you just purl around right there. But if you prefer just doing a bit of rib and binding off, of course, you're absolutely free to do that as well. It's not included in the pattern, but you can do that. And speaking of the pattern, you'll find that linked down below so you can knit along with me. It comes in 11 different sizes, from a small little baby sock all the way up to a large adult sized foot. Now, if you just want to practice these techniques and you're not concerned about it fitting anybody, then cast on the smallest size and get your flexible DPNs and just knit like a trial or test sock to learn how to do all of these different techniques that we're going to cover in this tutorial. First thing we're going to want to do is work a cast on, and we need a slip knot. So work out however you like to do a slip knot, that is totally fine. If you're not sure how to do one, here's a simple method. Pinch the yarn between your thumb and index finger, wrap the yarn around your first two fingers, and then pinch it between your thumb and finger again. Then you're going to wrap again, but you're going to wrap it to the left of that first wrap and pinch again. Then you just take your needle, slip it up between the two, scoop up that second one and bring it through, and there's your slip knot. So we're going to hold this and another needle together. Now, needle 1 is on the top, needle 2 is on the bottom, and it has our slip knot. So we're going to pinch them. They're going to be pointing to the right. Now for our Turkish cast on, we are just going to simply wrap the yarn around both of these needles to create the loops that will become our stitches. So the pattern will tell you how many to cast on. In my case, I am casting on 16 altogether, so 8 on each needle. So I'm going to wrap the yarn 8 times. So to do that, we've got our needles ready. They're pointing to the right, slip knots on the bottom. We're going to grab that tail and get it out of the way and take our working yarn. And you can hold that slip knot in place so it doesn't slide around. We're going to bring it up and over and back down. There's one wrap on both needles, back towards the back. There's 2, there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And of course, it's just looped around, so I've got to hold on to that so I don't lose it. But those are my 16 stitches. I have it wrapped around both needles, 8 on each needle tip. So I'm going to hold that yarn in place. I'm going to grab needle 2, that's the one underneath, sort of slide it out so those loops are just resting on that little cable in the middle of these 2 needles. And then I just need to simply knit across these loops, and I got to hold on. I don't want to lose anything here. So I get my other needle and I'm going to bring this yarn to the back, hold it in whichever hand is comfortable for you. I just prefer knitting with my yarn in my left hand. So I'm going to grab that, push them up onto the tip of the needle, and just knit across these 8 loops. Okay, so things are secure now. I can drop that yarn, and we're going to slide these up. So everything's sort of on the cables right now. Turn. So now needle 2 is on the top. I'm going to push those wraps up onto that needle. Now the first thing here is the slip knot, so I can just drop that off. It's not going to go anywhere. Well, we want to still hold on to that, our working yarn, because it can sort of seem like it's going to unravel here. So I've got the working yarn, slip knots right there. Bring that yarn to the back and knit across the loops on this needle. That last one can be tight, so you can put your needle in there and wiggle it around to make it a little larger. There we go. So slide that onto its cord, turn, so needle 1 is on top again. Now we're ready to actually start our toe. We've done our cast on, we've done a closed cast on, so it looks like stitches right in the center on the bottom of our toe instead of having some kind of a seam down there. Now we can start increasing, and this is divided up into 2 parts. The first part is going to create more of that rounded shape on the very edge of the toe. So slide those stitches up onto the needle, and we're going to work our increase round, our first increase round. This is round 1, so we're going to knit 1, work a yarn over, just put it around your needle like that, knit to the last stitch, which of course there's not many, we only have 8 stitches here. And now we're going to have 10 after working 2 yarn overs. So right up to the last stitch. Now in the pattern I have this called a reverse yarn over, where you've got the yarn in the back. So instead of bringing it up and over the needle like a yarn over like that, you're going to take it and come from behind and up and over this way. Now you can do this, that's a reverse yarn over, or you can do a regular yarn over and then just adjust it after. Basically, we want our yarn overs to face different directions, so when we knit into them, they will be mirrored, but they won't be both knit in the same direction. But this can be tricky to do. Well, it's easy to do, but later on it can sort of hide itself over another stitch, and you've got to separate them. It can be a little bit tedious, and if you work it too tightly, it definitely wants to do that. So I tend to do this one just a little loose, hold it with my finger, and then knit that last stitch. We're going to do that on the other side as well. So I turn, slide the next set of stitches up, and if you can't remember where you're at, just count the stitches. The one you just did has 10, this one still has 8. So we're going to repeat this again on needle 2. Knit the first stitch, yarn over, knit to the last stitch. And then do that reverse yarn over. This time I'm just going to work a regular one, and I'll show you what to do to that if you just want to work a regular yarn over here. And knit 1. So round 2 is the round we're going to continue doing for a while until we have about half our stitches. So in my case, I need a sock that's going to have 72 stitches. So I'm going to repeat this round we're going to do now, round 2, until I have 36 stitches. That's half of that 72. So round 2, we're going to knit 1. And I do like to sort of pull these needles tight and close together. I pull that firmly. I think that does avoid getting any ladders right here. So it's still kind of on the edge of the needle tip. It's not on the cord, so when I'm pulling, it's not making it really small, but just keeping it a little firm. Then we're going to work that yarn over again, and then we have a yarn over right here. If I knit it through the front, it's going to leave a big hole. We don't want that in our sock toe, so what we're going to do is knit that in the back. It can be hard to do, so I like to put my needle in the front and sort of slide it up and around. Now it's into the back of that stitch, and I can knit it, and you can see it leans, it closes the yarn over, and that strand of yarn in the front leans off in that direction. It's leaning off to the left. So that's when we say we are mirroring them on the other side. We want it to lean in the opposite direction. So this is going that way. So we're going to knit to that last yarn over. And on this side, I had already reversed it. So we'll see what that looks like. You can see it's looks kind of weird right there, because thankfully it's not like sitting over the top of another stitch, but I can see it there, and it is a little tight, even though I tried to do it loosely. So it's reversed already. Now if I knit this one through the back, you can see what's going to happen right away. There's going to be a hole right there. We don't want that. So this one, because we've already reversed it, we want to knit in the front. So I like to use my finger to sort of push some of that yarn to the front so I can get my needle in there, or use the needle tip and sort of pull on it to get the yarn to the front. Insert just like a stitch and knit it. And you can see the yarn is leaning off in that direction. It's leaning off to the right. So we've mirrored our increases. So they are leaning in 2 different directions, mirroring each other. And then we work that reverse yarn over here and knit 1. So there is needle 1. So we turn and we do the same again on needle 2. And this stitch here can seem like it's really large, but that's just where the tail of yarn is. You can see I can tighten it right up again. We can fix that when we are closing up things at the bottom if we need to, and just using our tail of yarn to like sort of snug it up tighter. So slide those stitches up onto the needle tip. And I'm sliding these onto just the very edge of the needle here, just because I know When I'm knitting this first stitch, I want to snug it up so there's not going to be a ladder right there. And then I yarn over, and then there's that yarn over that I worked on the previous round, so I need to knit it through the back. So I kind of slide it around. Now it's in the back, and knit that so it's leaning off to the left, and knit to the last yarn over. So on this side, I just worked a regular yarn over instead of a reverse yarn over. So if you did that as well, instead of just knitting this one through the back, making this one lean off to the left, we want to turn it around. So I'm going to put my needle right into the center of it, and I'm going to slip it. We're slipping it knitwise, like that. And then, now you can see it's leaning off to the right, like our reverse yarn over. Now I can slip it back to this needle. Purlwise, we're just slipping it back, not changing the stitch mount. Now I can knit it through the front, and of course get my needle in there to sort of get some of that yarn so I can get into that stitch. Knit it through the front. Now it's going to lean off to the right. Work my next reverse yarn over and knit the last stitch. So at this point we've got a little bit of fabric there, so you can put a stitch marker close to one side so you can tell that this is like the beginning of the round. But we're just going to be working this same round until we have half our stitch count. So right now I have probably 12 stitches on here. So I'm going to keep on this side right here, so 24 altogether. So I need to keep repeating this until I have 36 stitches. The pattern will tell you how many stitches you should have for whatever size that you are knitting. So let's go through that round one more time. Knit one, yarn over, knit this yarn over through the back loop, and then knit to the last 2 stitches. And you can see here, I can tell this is this is what the reverse yarn over likes to do. It likes to sit on top of the other stitches around it. So I need to sort of wiggle that stitch out from underneath. And if you really don't like to do this, then work a regular yarn over and slip it to change the stitch mount, which is probably what I'm going to do after I fix this one. There's that stitch, so I can knit that. And now knit my reverse yarn over through the front. Work a reverse yarn over. I think I'm just going to work a normal one and fix the stitch mount, and knit one. And turn and do this on the other needle. So I have the stitches that I need. As you can see, it was not very much more fabric. It just gives us a little bit of a rounded shape down here on the bottom. Now we're going to change the rate just a little bit. We're going to slow down how fast we're increasing. We're going to do it every other round. So on this first round, we are just going to knit and knit those yarn overs to close them up. And I'm also going to show you what to do if you forget to work a yarn over, which I do quite a lot. So how you can sneak one back in there. We're just going to use make ones, which technically look exactly the same. So on round one, we're going to knit one, and then knit that yarn over through the back loop, and then knit to our last 2 stitches on needle 1. And it looks like, oh no, I remember this yarn over. So I just did a regular one, so I'm going to slip it and reverse the stitch mount, and then knit it through the front leg. And knit that last stitch and repeat this on the other side. So we're not adding any new yarn overs on this round. So I'm coming up to the last 2 stitches, and it looks like I did forget my yarn over here. So I know in this location, the end result of the stitch, I want to lean off in this direction towards the right. So I'm going to pick up that strand of yarn between these 2 stitches here. Just pick it up, doesn't matter how. Now when I look at it, okay, it's sitting on there like a regular yarn over, and I don't want that. If I had forgotten one at the beginning of the row, that's how I would pick it up. I would pick it up front to back, then I could knit it through the back loop, and it's going to lean off to the left just like that yarn over at this end. But I need it to go in the other direction, so I'm going to slip it just like I would my yarn over, put it back, and now I can knit it through that front leg after getting some of that the yarn there. And there we go. So it's basically just working a make one. In this case, we're working a make one right, so it leans off to the right. So if you forget a yarn over, that is all you have to do. You can pick up that running bar between the two stitches that are on the needle, and that's just as if you had worked a yarn over there, but you're just catching it on the row later. Okay, so that's round one. So round two is where we're going to actually work our yarn overs. We don't have to close any, they're all resolved right now, so we're just going to add some new ones. So knit one, yarn over, and knit to that last stitch and yarn over again. Right here, so oops, dropped my stitch. So what you'd want to do is work that reverse yarn over. Let me fix my stitch first. There we go. Or just a normal yarn over if you prefer, which I actually do prefer, and then knit that last stitch. Repeat this on the other side. So this is our increase round. We're increasing 4 stitches on this round. So we're just going to keep repeating both of these rounds. So round one, where we're closing up those yarn overs, or if we forgot them, picking them up as make ones and just working them in that way instead. And then this round, round two, where we are adding a yarn over at each edge. So I'm just going to keep repeating this until I have all the stitches I need. In my case, that is 72 stitches. So just follow the pattern and do this for the number of stitches that you need. And as you get more fabric in your toe, you can move this marker over. So maybe I'll just do that now actually, just so you can tell which side is the beginning of round. There, so we've got it right there where we need it. So I'm going to keep following these 2 rounds until I have the stitch count that I need, and then we can start working on the actual foot of our sock. So I'm coming up on the last round of my toe. We're finishing with round 1, so we resolve all of those increases that we did, all those yarn overs. I've moved my beginning of round marker just up so it's closer to my needle, tucked in the yarn tail because we don't really need that right now, it kind of gets in the way. And now I just want to talk about using these needles. So right now I'm finishing the very last round, and this is the needle I'm working off of, the one in my left hand. This is the right needle. I'm working the stitches onto this needle, and then we've got this needle hanging out in the back with the other half of the stitches. So on the left side, I just kind of cup that end of the needle underneath my hand as I'm knitting. On this side, there's a few things you can do. You can sort of let it just hang out like that. I like to actually put my fingers inside my project, and my other fingers are out here. And I'm just knitting across, finishing up. Another option you can do is to sort of cup it with all your fingers. I still have a couple fingers inside, and the other needle tips are underneath my 2 fingers right there. I kind of alternate between those 2 methods as I'm working on a sock. So you can see I'm kind of cupping it, it's moving this way. That flexible cord in the middle really allows you to bend those needles quite a bit. You just want to make sure that the stitches stay in the center, because if they get too close to the edge, then they can slip right off the end of the needle. So that's the end of that round, and you can see it's pretty close right there, but it's still pretty much in the center. So I finished that. Now it's time to work on the foot, and we have a lace panel that's going to be running up the very top of the instep. So what we're going to do here, needle 1, this needle just after the beginning of round, is our heel. So we're going to knit to the end of that, and then on the next side, on needle 2, the instep, we're going to place a couple of markers to separate the center stitches. So when I'm starting a new round, I push those stitches up, and I'm pinching this one close, because I don't want, this is where you can get ladders even with these kind of needles, so I'm sort of holding it close. I tighten up on the yarn right there. It's on the needle back here though, so it's not going to get super tight, but just hold it a little firm, tighten it up right there, and then just knit across the needle. And I never seem to have ladders with this, like that. I don't do anything special. I just try to hold it close and just maybe work the first stitch firmly, but not super tight. We don't want it to be so tight that we can't get the stitches back on the needle. Finished with needle 1. Now I'm turning it and I'm working on needle 2, and we're going to set up to work that lace panel. Of course, if you just want plain stockinette socks, go right ahead. But the pattern will direct you to how many stitches to separate. It's basically the center 14 stitches. So I'm just going to be working, that's 5. There's 11. I'll place a marker, and then you're going to knit across 14 stitches. So there's my 14, and I have 11 over here. So whatever size you're knitting, you'll have 14 in the center and then an equal number of stitches at each edge. So now we're all set up to work that lace across the instep. So that's all we're going to do is knit the length of the sock for the foot. Now the pattern will tell you how long the foot should be until you would stop and start your gusset increases. So you can refer to the pattern for that, but I'm just going to knit across the heel side of my stitches, and then we will start on the instep, and I'll show you how that first round of the lace is worked. It's a very simple pattern, and it's charted and written, so you can just follow that. Every other round is just knit, so you're just working, I think, maybe 8 rounds of lace. And now I'm on needle 2. I've just knit across needle 1, so we're just going to knit to that marker. And then across those center 14 stitches, we'll work our lace panel. So this first round is pretty simple. They're all very simple. It's just SSKs, knit 2 togethers, and yarn overs. So it's knit 1, knit 2 together, knit 5, yarn over, knit 1, yarn over, knit 2, SSK, and knit 1. And that's it for that round. And then knit to the end of the round. So I'm just going to continue working the foot. Everything's established. So this is how I'm holding my needles right now, another odd position. It's sort of sitting between my fingers, that back needle, and it's underneath my hand on this side. So it's just a matter of finding the position that's most comfortable for you. The front needles are absolutely fine. It's just finding a position for those the back needle as you're working across the sock. So I'm just going to keep knitting until the sock is, well, obviously I'm on my second one, until it's the same length as this one. Then you can see the gusset starts right here on this sock. So it's an inch or so right there. And then we have our heel that we have to start. So this is how much you're saving space for, basically, for your sock. So you want to knit until it's to this point, or whatever the point is on your foot, for the length that you need, leaving enough because we still have our gusset to work, and then we also have our heel to work. Once your sock is as long as it needs to be, we can stop and start the gusset. So we're at the beginning of our round right now, so I'm going to knit across needle 1. And then we need to place markers to set up for our gusset on needle 2. We're not putting gusset stitches on this side. We're going to turn, and they're going to go right here on the instep. Because when we work our heel, we need them out of the way. We're not going to actually work the gusset stitches with the heel stitches when we do the short row turns. So we want to put them over on the instep needle, sort of to keep them out of the way and not confuse them with the heel stitches, which we'll be working next. So knit across needle 1, and then we're going to turn and work across needle 2, and we need 2 of those stitch markers. So the first thing we're going to do is work a right lifted increase, and we work that into a stitch. So find that, it's going to be that first stitch on your needle. You're going to lift up the right leg of that stitch, right like that. This leg of the stitch underneath, put it up on the needle. Keep your finger there to separate them, because we're going to have to work both of these. These are both stitches now. So we're going to knit into that loop that we've just picked up. That's our increase. And then to finish it, we have to actually knit the stitch. That's part of the increase. So that's our right lifted increase. Now we've got 2 stitches. We're going to place that marker. And we can knit across. You're going to keep your lace pattern going whatever round you're on in the lace. You're just going to continue to work that. And we're going to work to that last stitch on the other side and place the other marker. Let me see, I'm on row or round 10, so I just have to knit on this round. So I'm coming up to my final stitch, and the left lifted increase, we need to work on the other side of this stitch. So we're going to place the marker now. Now, if you look at that stitch, we would work it into the stitch below, but we don't want to work it in the right leg, we want to work it in the left. But we can't really get there yet, so we need to work the stitch first. We're going to knit it, but that moves it down one. We don't want to work into this stitch that we just knit because it would just create another loop and we'd just have a bigger loop. It wouldn't really work. So we go to the stitch underneath. I know this first one is right on the edge, so it might be hard to see, but there it is. The stitch underneath is the one we want. We pick that up on our left needle and we just knit into it and drop it off. And now we've got our left lifted increase. If you prefer, go ahead and make one right and left instead, but this is just another increase that you can have in your toolbox. So there's our setup round. Now the next round, round 2 of this setup, is to just knit to the end of round on your first needle. Then on needle 2, you're going to keep working, knitting across on both sides and then continuing your lace panel in the center. So I'm going to do that, and then we'll come back and we'll do round 1 of our actual increase round now that we've set up for it. All right, so I finished my setup round 2, where basically you're just knitting around, keeping your lace in pattern. And then our actual round 1, we just knit across our heel stitches, which I've just done. And then all of the work we're doing for our gusset is on the instep. So on needle 2, we're going to knit to 1 stitch before the marker, and of course right now that's just 1 stitch. Then we're going to work that right lifted increase. So to do that again, the stitch that's on our needle, you go to the stitch just under it and grab that right leg, pop it up, but keep it separate because we're going to have to work both of these. Knit into it. Try not to split the stitch. And then knit into the stitch. That's part of that increase. And we've got another stitch there. So then you will continue to work across your instep stitches here, just knitting. And then slip that marker and work your lace panel. I'm on a knit round, so I just have to knit across these stitches. And that is a good thing to pay attention to. So in my case, I know that on my plain knit rounds are the rounds I'll be increasing for my gusset. Depending on where you are in the pattern, you might be doing the same, or your increase rounds might be when you're actually working the lace rows. Slip the marker, knit these stitches, and then slip this marker, and like before, that left lifted increase has to be worked into the stitch that's below the stitch on the needle, but we can't get to that left leg until we work the stitch, which moves it down 1. So we knit that stitch, and then it's not this stitch here, it's 1 stitch below that. So we pop that leg up onto our needle, knit into it, drop it off. There's our increase, knit to the end of our needle, which right now is just 1 stitch. So now my next round, round 2 of this, is just to knit around, keeping your lace in pattern. You're just going to continue doing these 2 rounds, your increase round followed by a plain knit round, repeating it until you have enough stitches for your gusset on either side. In my case, I think that was 8 stitches. Well, I'm increasing 7 on each side, so you'll have the increased stitches plus that 1 extra stitch we started with. So I'm increasing, for my size, I'm increasing 7 stitches. So I'm going to repeat this increase round till I have 8 stitches on either side of the marker, because I started with a stitch to make the increase. So we're just going to continue those 2 rounds until you have the stitch count that you need on either side. And then we're going to move on to working our short row heel. I've finished my last gusset increase. You can see what's happening right here. We've got stitches on either side. That's that increase line right there where we worked our increases right there. And it adds a few stitches on either side. We're done with that for now. Now we're going to continue working just on the heel, back and forth on needle 1 only. We've finished this part of our gusset right there. Now it's time for the heel. Then we'll come back and we'll decrease our gusset stitches. So at this point, we do have one more round to work. After you have all of the stitches you need for your gusset, we're going to work a setup round. We need to put some markers in place on this side of the heel. So this is where you're going to have 6 markers all together. You'll have 4 on the needle 2, and you'll have 2 more on needle 1. So basically we are dividing our sock heel into thirds. The pattern will spell this out specifically for each sock size. For my particular size, because the stitch count works out to be divided by 3 equally, I'm going to knit 12, place a marker, knit 12 more, and place a marker, and then knit the final 12. So my heel will be divided equally into thirds. So no matter your sock size, if it can't be equally divided, then if there's 1 extra stitch, it can go in the middle. If there's 2 extra stitches, you can put 1 on either side, but you just want your heel divided basically into 3 equal parts. And my second marker will go right there, and I'm going to knit to the end of this needle, and then I'm going to work around on needle 2 and get back to the beginning of round, and then we can start our heel. I'm back to the beginning of round. I have worked across my instep. Now we're going to just work here only. But one thing to note is whatever round you left off on your lace, just make note of that, because you're going to continue with that. When the heel is finished, we'll start knitting in the round, and you want to just continue your lace wherever you left off in your particular rounds on the pattern. But for now, we're just going to work back and forth on this needle, so we can ignore needle 2 altogether for a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do is start our wrap and turns. We're going to knit right to the last stitch, just on needle 1. Okay, so I'm coming up to my last stitch, and we're going to wrap and turn on that stitch. Now a wrap and turn short row is just how it sounds. You're wrapping the yarn around that stitch, and then you're turning and working in the other direction. Now different wrap and turns can be done differently. You're basically going to you're slipping the stitch and wrapping the yarn around it. Some people slip the stitch first, some people slip the yarn forward first. It doesn't matter. Whichever way you like to do it, if you have a preferred method, just be consistent and do it that way every time. I like to slip the stitch first, personally. So we're going to slip purlwise. We're not changing the stitch mount. Slipping that stitch from the left needle to the right needle, bringing the working yarn to the front, holding it there, slipping that stitch back, and then I can take that yarn, which is wrapped around this stitch, I'll bring it back around to the front. If I can catch it, goodness, it's getting all wrapped up around my needles. And I'm going to take it to the back again. And now that stitch is wrapped. It's nice when you have 2 different colors, because you can really see the difference right there. So now our next step is to purl to the last stitch on this side, because when we do our short rows, we do them in pairs. You do one over here, then you do one over here, and you keep repeating that back and forth. And we're going to work short rows on all the stitches on either side of this marker. We won't work any short rows on the stitches in the center. They'll remain unworked. We'll be knitting back and forth across them, but we're not going to actually make them into short rows. But all the stitches on either side, back and forth. So we turn. Even though we've got a stitch remaining over here, that's what a short row is. We're working short of the end of the row. So we want to purl to that last stitch, and we'll wrap that stitch. So when you are knitting the first stitch or purling the first stitch after, I like to pull that yarn a little firmly to just avoid any holes, basically, and then go back to normal tension. So I'm just going to purl to that last stitch, and we will do another wrap and turn on the purl side. Okay, I'm coming up on my last stitch right here, and we're going to do the same thing. The yarns, we're just going to keep it where the yarn is right now, slip that stitch purlwise, take the yarn to the back, slip the stitch back to the left needle, bring the yarn back to the front, and we've wrapped that stitch. So now we can hold that in place and turn Careful not to drop that lonely little stitch off the needle. So that's sort of our setup. And now we are going to continue making more short rows. So we're going to knit right over to the end, one stitch before that wrapped stitch. You can see right there on the end, there's a little collar around our stitch, a little wrap. We're going to knit right up to that stitch and make another wrap and turn. So pull it firmly, knit that first stitch, and then knit to the end, or knit to the previous wrapped stitch. So I'm coming up to that last stitch, and there is the previous stitch. And here is my one stitch before. So I'll keep my yarn to the back, slip the stitch over, bring the yarn to the front, slip the stitch back, bring the yarn to the back. And now we have wrapped that stitch. We can turn, and we're going to do the same on the other end. We're going to purl and wrap the stitch, one stitch before the previous wrap. So purl firmly to close up any holes right here, or potential holes, and we'll purl to one stitch before the previously wrapped stitch. Now I'm coming up on where I know I have to be. It's harder to tell the wrapped stitch, I think, on the purl side, because we already have the heads of the stitches there, but it is this little wrap around the bottom right there. And we can also tell by the gap that is created. When I turn, I'll show you what I mean. So I'm one stitch before, I'm going to slip it, bring the yarn to the back, slip it back, bring the yarn to the front, and now we can turn. The yarn is already where we need to be to knit. So we're just going to continue this process, working to the previously wrapped stitch, doing a wrap and turn on the next stitch, purling, doing a wrap and turn back and forth until all the stitches on either side have been worked. We'll end with a wrong side row, working a wrap and turn right here. So the way to see what stitches have already been wrapped is to, at least on the knit side row, sometimes you'll have to turn and look because it's easier to see the wrap on the front. Like the heads of the stitches underneath can interfere, not interfere, but it makes it a little harder to tell. So if we look over here, you can see there's like this blue wrap around that yellow stitch. There's this pinkish wrap around this blue stitch, just right underneath the stitch that's on your needle. So that's the last stitch that has a wrap. And I can stretch it out and you can see there's also like a gap between the first two stitches because that's where we turned, and you can end up with a gap in that space because the stitch is sort of hugging the one it's beside where we've wrapped it with, but it's making a space right there. It's a little hard to see now, but after I do a few more, you'll be able to tell that. So at this point, we're just going to work back and forth till we have wrapped and turned on every side of these stitches between. We're not touching the stitches between the markers. So here's where we are at right now. We've worked back and forth to create these short row turns. You can see it sort of creates this curve. This is the first half of the curve. I have one more to work. I'm going to work it from the right side so you can see what I'm doing, but this is what they look like when you're trying to find the one you're supposed to work. There's space between the previous two that you've worked right there. And the stitch right before, it's been wrapped close to it, so it's trying to hug that stitch. But this first, so this is the last wrapped stitch right here, the first of this pair. So the next stitch I need to wrap is right here. So that's how you can tell like what stitch you're supposed to be wrapping, is there'll be a space to one side of the stitch, and that stitch has already been wrapped. You can see the little collar on the stitch right there. And it's this stitch that it's hugging right to the side. That's the one we need to work. So I'm going to work it right from this side. It's nice to learn how to purl back so you don't have to turn your work when you're working short rows like this. So it's this stitch right here. So I'm going to slip it and wrap it. And that is the last one for the first half of our heel shaping. Now for part two, we are going to be removing these markers, resolving our wraps, and creating more wraps where each stitch is going to have two wraps around it. So let's see how we're going to do that. So we're going to knit to this second marker. And we can remove this marker when we come to it because we're finished with it. Now we don't need it anymore. We're going to use the wrapped stitches as our guides. So the first thing we need to do is resolve this first wrapped stitch. And all we do is knit that wrap together with the stitch. So all I like to do is sort of push my needle tip down. I'm going to go underneath that wrap and then into the stitch, wrap my yarn to knit, pull it through both of them. And that sort of pushes that wrap to the back. And then we're going to wrap our next stitch. Even though it's already wrapped, we're making another short row. So we're going to slip that stitch, bring the yarn to the front, slip it back, bring the yarn to the back. So now this stitch, if you look closely, it's got this orange wrap down here, and now it's got this gray wrap as well. It has two wraps around it. So when we come back to it, we're going to resolve both of those wraps. So now we're going to turn and do the same thing. I'm going to purl to that marker. Now I can remove this marker. We're done with that. And for this one, the wrap is coming around, but we want to purl it together with the stitch. What I like to do is come behind and grab it from behind, pop it up onto the needle. Now I can just purl them together. And we're going to double wrap this stitch. You can see the wraps there. I think they're a little harder to see on this side, but you can turn them around and they'll be more obvious. But we're going to wrap the next stitch. So now it will have two wraps. Okay, so now we are just going to continue until we get to that wrapped stitch, resolve it, both of the wraps, and wrap the next stitch. We're just going to keep doing that until we get to the last wrapped stitch on either side. And we'll have a double wrapped stitch on each side when we're done, and then we're going to resolve those and do something to close up the holes. So I'm just going to work to that double wrapped stitch. So there's the one I just worked, and this is the one we're looking for. So that first wrap is down here, and then you can see there's both wraps right there. So I've got my needle in them, and I'm going to get my needle into the stitch, and I'm going to knit them all together. And this can be a bit finicky to get your yarn through there, so sometimes I've got the stitch. Now I can maybe pull these two over. There we go. It can be a little hard to do, but you might have to maneuver them a little. So both of those wraps are now pushed to the back, and now we can wrap the next stitch. So now this one will have two wraps, so a double wrapped stitch. So it's got the same, one that's the same color, and then this grayish one right there. And we'll do that on the other side. Now it's a little harder to see them on the purl side, so just pay attention as you're knitting so you don't accidentally knit past it. Okay, and it's hugging this one right there. So I think that's the one I wrapped. Let me check. Okay, yes, that's the one I already knit. So the next one that has to be knit is hugged right up next to it. Or purled, I should say. So that one is done. So now I've got to find my two wraps. You can see there's a yellow one here and a gray one here. So from this side, we want to like maybe turn and look for the wrap on this side. Can be a little difficult to see. There they are, they're right there. So I want to pop them both up onto the needle. And if you can't get both at once, just try to do one at a time. I'm gonna need to bring my yarn to the front anyway, so I'll do that and get it out of the way. Okay, there's that gray one. So I can put that up. And then the next one is yellow. So try to find that one and put that up. I know this part is a bit tricky trying to find those wraps, but now I've got all three on there, the stitch and the two wraps. I can try to purl them together. There we go. Now I can wrap my next stitch. So bring my yarn to the front, wrap my stitch there. Okay, now I'm ready to turn and go back and work in the other direction. So let's do this one more time. Pulling it snug, so I know the next time I come around, it's that second stitch in this little pair that are really close together. Okay, I'm coming up close to that pair here. So this is the one that I just finished, and this is the one that was just wrapped. So I can see there's one, there's two, go into my stitch and knit through all three. There we go. Oh, and I split something, so pull that off too. There we go. And then I can double wrap that next stitch. Pull it snug and purl across to that other side. Coming up on that pair that are really close together, so I know the first one is the one I just did, and here's the one I wrapped. So bring my yarn to the front and get it out of the way. There's the first wrap sitting right at the top. And I might have to turn and fish around. Where is that second wrap? It's further down here, right there. Sort of, you can still see it. It's going in the opposite direction above. There's some stitches there, and there's this yarn right here that's wrapping around. So I just want to get that up on my needle. And now I can purl all three of those together. Not split anything. There we go. And then wrap the next stitch. And turn my work. And work that one firmly. Oops, get my yarn to the back. And then we're just going to keep repeating that back and forth until we have one double wrapped stitch at each end. So I'm just going to continue doing this back and forth until we have one each on each side, and then I'll show you how to finish those off and avoid holes at the corners of our heel. I'm almost at the end. Here is one more wrapped stitch on this side. And now my last one, I can wrap this last stitch. So this is the last one on this side. So hold that firmly, turn and purl back, and we'll do the same on the other end of this heel. Now these last two wraps on this side, get the yarn out of the way, there's one of them. There is the other one. Purl three, all of those together. And then wrap this last stitch. Okay, now we're going to do two more rows on the heel for these last two double wrapped stitches and to close any holes. What we're going to do is work a wrap and turn on the first and last stitch of our instep needle. So I'm going to knit to this last double wrapped stitch, and then I'll show you what we're going to do there. So here's the last double wrapped stitch. So I'm going to resolve that one. That final wrap is way down here, so I'm just going to get my needle into there and into that stitch and pull them over. And there we go. Now, before we turn and work in the other direction, we're going to turn. And I want to pretend that this is part of my heel right here, this one stitch on the instep. We're going to work a wrap and turn right on that stitch, just as if it were still over here on this needle. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to slip it, bring the yarn forward, slip it back, bring the yarn back. And right now it's loose, but we're going to tug it tight as we come and purl back, and that will help close up any gaps right here. And we're going to do the same thing over on the other end. So holding this one, and we're going to pull it tight, snug it right up so we can avoid any holes right there, and purl to our last double wrapped stitch. I'm coming up on my last double wrapped stitch, so I'm going to find those two wraps and get them on my needle. Try not to lose my stitch. There's the first one. right there. And the second one, usually it looks like it's way further down, and it is. So right down here. There it is. Put that up on my needle. Okay, so I can purl these together. And then we're going to do the same thing that we did on the other side. We are going to come around and pretend that this first stitch is on this needle, basically, and we want to wrap it. So I'm going to use this needle, I think, and then we can slip it over here. So we're going to slip it. Wrap the yarn or pull the yarn around it, slip it back to that needle. It's very loosey-goosey right now. We have pulled on it so much I've got excess yarn from either side, but that's okay, we can fix that. Take the yarn to the back. And now that that stitch has been wrapped, we're going to turn, and this is sort of simulating like the yarn is coming from the back at this point. We've finished all of our heel shaping. So we're going to start knitting in the round again, but we're sort of back at the beginning of round. My beginning of round marker is down here, so I'm going to just slide it up closer. So we're going to start knitting in the round. On this first round, we are going to get rid of those double wrap stitches by resolving them and knitting a little tightly just to close up any gaps we might have right there. But as you can see from this sock, I mean, if I pull it tight, you can see it might be a little loose right there, but that's not bad. Same on the other side. It's a little bit loose, but I could take the end of my needle and pull those stitches and pull some of the excess fabric out and away if I wanted to. But overall, it's not a terrible looking heel. So that's our next round, and then we're going to start getting rid of our gusset decreases after that. So the first thing to do is we're just going to knit across needle 1 and resume knitting in the round. So wherever you pulling that tight, because it's attached to the stitch on this needle over here, so we want to make sure we get rid of any holes. We're pulling that tight, and now I go back to normal tension. So we're going to knit to the end of needle 1, and there's no more turning to work wrong side rows. We're going to start working across needle 2. So if you made a note of where you left off in your lace panel, we're going to start working that again across the instep, so you can pick up right wherever you left off in that lace pattern. So here's the end of needle 1. We're done turning and working the wrong side though, so we're going to turn and work across the instep. So this first stitch is that stitch that we wrapped. So we want to find that stitch. It's right here. It's kind of loose where we were manipulating it. There's that wrap. So I'm going to insert into that, into the stitch, pull it through. Oops, I dropped that one. So let's do that again. Insert into the wrap and then the stitch. Okay, there's the stitch. Pull that wrap over. Okay, so that one's resolved. I'm going to pull it tight right there. Work this next one firmly. And now I can just knit across to the end of the needle until that last wrapped stitch, and we'll resolve that one as well and maintain your lace pattern across the instep. I'm coming up to the end of needle 2 and that last double wrapped stitch that we did on this side, or well, just that wrapped stitch. There's not 2 wraps. So this one, look for that wrap hiding down here. It's connected to the stitch over here. So I can insert into that. Then into the stitch. I'm going to take the stitch right off the needle and then pull that wrap over this new stitch. It can be a little tight right here and you've got this needle in the way, but just do your best. There, that works better. Get that out of the way. Try not to split the stitches around it. That seems to be the hard thing for me to do right now. Okay. There we go. That one has been resolved. So now we're at the end of our round again, or the beginning of the next round. So on this round, we're going to start doing our decreasing for the gusset. So needle 1, we are back just knitting on this needle. So I'm going to knit to the end of needle 1, So there's the end of needle 1, turn. Now on needle 2, we're going to start removing all of those gusset stitches. So for our decrease round, we are going to knit to 2 stitches before the marker. This first marker on the side where our gusset stitches are. Right there. We'll knit 2 together. Slip the marker, knit across these stitches, and then you'll want to do your lace pattern, whatever round you're on those center stitches. And make note of the pattern, like I just did a decrease and now I know I'm on the next actual lace pattern and not like a knit round. So I know that when I'm working the lace rounds, those are the rounds that I'm working my decrease stitches. And then the plain knit rounds in between, I'm just knitting all the way around. And then we knit the stitches on the other side of the lace panel. Then here is that last marker for our gusset stitches on the left side. So we're going to knit to that marker, slip the marker, do an SSK right here with those first 2 stitches, and then knit to the end of the round. And then the next round, I'm just going to knit all the way around, maintaining my lace pattern across those center stitches. And repeat those 2 rounds. Repeat that decrease round after I work a knit round. Keep repeating those 2 rounds until all that's left on either side of this marker is 1 stitch. When you have 1 stitch left on each side, you'll be back to your stitch count that you started with. In my case, I will be back to 36 stitches when there is 1 stitch left on either side. That's 36 stitches on this needle, 72 altogether. So when I have the same stitch count on both needles, there'll be 1 stitch left on either side of the marker. I can remove these markers and then just continue knitting the sock leg as long as I want it. So that's all we're going to be doing right now, is working those decrease rounds. Our heel is finished. We're working the round. We're going to work decrease rounds. And then when you're done with that, you're going to continue knitting the leg. I actually that's when I stopped and I started doing my cuff, because I like a shorty sock, and that worked out very well to just, when the decreases were done, that was a little more than 1 inch here for the length of the back of the foot, so I could just start on my hem. But you can continue knitting the length of the sock for the leg as long as you want it to be. So right now, that's all we're doing. We're going to finish the leg, working these 2 rounds until we're back to our stitch count, and then continuing the leg for as long as we want it to be. I've finished my gusset decreases. I have 1 stitch left on each side of the marker now. So on this next round, I'm going to remove my markers. I should have my total stitch count now. For me, that's 36 stitches on one needle, 36 stitches on the other. So I'll remove these markers, and this is where you're just going to continue in your pattern for as long as you want. If you want a longer sock, just continue knitting until it's the length you want. Personally, I like shorty socks, and this gusset decrease round, or the rounds to do that, created enough space above that short row heel that it makes a good shorty sock. With a short row heel, you don't want to start your hem or your cuff right away, because the heel part will be too short and it'll sit too low on the heel, and it'll start slipping off the back of your foot. So if you're using a short row heel, you want to knit about 1 inch or so above that to make sure that the back of the heel is going to be long enough. And where we've worked these gussets, then that gives us about 1 inch or so. If yours is a smaller gusset and it's shorter, just keep knitting a few rounds until you have at least 1 inch above that last short row heel turn. So I'm going to actually just start the cuff now. The first step of that is just to knit 5 rounds of stockinette. So I'm going to stop my lace panel. I can take out all of these markers except my beginning of round marker and just knit 5 rounds. And also at this point, I like to look at my heel. Sometimes you end up with some stitches that look a little loose, and you can gently come in there and see if you can move some of the yarn using the tip of your needle right along that line. Where I've got this self-patterning yarn, it makes it easy to know where I'm at. And I can take some of that excess yarn out of those stitches in the heel and sort of slide it out of the way and over into some other stitches and spread it out a little more. That looks a little better. Could probably do that a little bit more if I want to. I think I will. I'm going to give that a good tug and get some of that yarn and pinch my finger on the other side so it won't go back that way, and I can move it along this row, adding a little bit of that excess to each of these stitches. There. And that sort of spreads it out a little bit. That looks fine. Could do the same on the other side. This yellow also looks a little bit loose right there. So I'll give it a nice tug, and I'll pull it in this direction away from the heel and over into the instep. So we don't really have any holes, but we can get some loose stitches right there. Well, it's a bit of a gap right there still, so I am going to pull up on that, see if I can move some of that yarn around. I can. Good. So I'll pull it up some more, get that gap closed up, and then move this along. Just move some of that extra to the other stitches. I like to do this just before I'm going to wash and block my socks. That'll help that yarn stay in place. Once it's been wet, it'll just sort of lock right there. So I do this right before. That looks a lot better. It's a little bit loose. I could probably play around with a few more stitches here if I wanted to, but I think that's going to be just fine. So I'm going to start my picot hem. So on this round, I'm going to remove all these markers that are around the sock and just knit around 5 times, 5 rounds for the first part of our picot. Then we'll do a round where we call it our turning round, where you can either work your picot hem, or if you don't want the picot edge, you just want it plain, you can do a purl round instead, and that will be our folding round. But we need to make a little bit of the hem first, or the cuff I should say. So we've got to do these 5 rounds of stockinette. In my sock, I have this little picot edge. That's the next thing to work. If you'd rather have a plain folded hem, then you're just going to purl the next round. This is all written in the pattern as well. But you would purl 1 round, and then we're going to work 4 more rounds of stockinette before we break the yarn and sew it down. I'm going to want to leave a long tail for that, but I'll talk about that after. But in my case, I'm going to do the picot round on this, but again, if you want to do a plain folded hem, you're going to purl 1 round and then do your 4 rounds of stockinette. But I want to do picot, so we're going to do that. And all of that is just a row of eyelets. We're going to yarn over. So if it's it's a yarn over at the beginning of the row, you're just putting your needle underneath and bringing the yarn over it. So we've got our yarn over there. I'm going to hold it there so we don't lose it, and then knit 2 together, these first 2 stitches on our needle. And that is the whole pattern repeat. Yarn over, and then knit 2 together. Yarn over, knit 2 together. You're just going to do this around the whole circumference of the sock. And then when you finish this round, you're going to knit 4 more rounds, just plain stockinette stitch for 4 rounds. Then we'll come back and we will sew down our folded hem. So after that picot row or your purl row round, then you're going to do your 4 rounds of stockinette stitch. Then it's time to bind off, and we want to bind off loosely. This sock needs to fit over our foot, and we want our cuff to be stretchy enough to fit over our foot. So that bind off has to be stretchy as well. So it doesn't have to be super, super stretchy, but either use a needle size that's a little larger than the current ones that you're using, or just make sure you're binding off loosely as you bind off. Don't do it very firmly, do it loosely. And one method is to do a suspended bind off, where we'll knit the first stitch, knit the next stitch, but I'm going to leave that stitch on my needle, and it makes me pull out more yarn as I come around and pull it over that first stitch. So it makes these stitches that I'm knitting, and then I can drop it off my needle right there. It makes the stitches that I'm creating on the bind off much more loose. So I'm knitting into that stitch, but I'm leaving it on there. I have to pull it around so I can get my needle tip in here to bind it off. And then I can drop it off the needle, and it makes a very nice loose bind off. Now it's not super stretchy like a Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off, but it does make it loose enough. And if you drop a stitch, then it's still on your needle, so it's okay. And you can come back in, get that stitch, bind off a stitch, and drop it off your needle. So this is how I'm going to bind off. Use a larger needle if you prefer, just to do a normal bind off. Just make sure it's loose enough. So after binding off, you're going to pull that tail through that last stitch. You're going to leave yourself a very long tail, like 3 times the circumference. I'll wrap it around that sock top 3 times plus a little extra. That'll give you plenty enough to make sure you've got enough to sew everything down. Now, another thing, at this point, it's going to curl, so it's kind of a pain to do. If you're really just want to get it done, you can do it this way. I just want to get it done, so I'm going to do it now, and then I'm going to wash this sock. But you can wash the sock first and then sort of press this out flat, so it'll be easier to roll down to the inside. But for demonstration purposes, I just want to do this right now. So you're just going to fold it along that picot line, or if you just did the folded hem along the purl line, fold it down in and pinch it there. And then on this side, you're just going to find a stitch that's about at the location you're at. And I like to use these curves right here, the little smiles that are right there. That's like the stitch or the connector between 2 stitches. So you're just going to go under that and pull it through. And then you're going to come to the bind off edge here, the next bind off chain, and go under both legs of the stitch, pull it through, and then just repeat that, holding that in place, finding like the spot underneath that's connected to it, not connected to it, but just pretty much underneath that area, this stitch right here, or the yarn between 2 stitches, and pull it through. You're just going to continue this the whole way around. So the next stitch is right here. So I'm going to go under that one, and then under this little running bar right there. Then you can also start doing it 2 at a time. So I'm under the running bar, and this is my next stitch, so I'm going to come under that as well at the same time. Makes it a little bit faster. And then moving right along, do that again under this running bar here. Oh, maybe this one here. And then under the legs of the stitch, just like that. And check the front, make sure nothing is peeking through. If you are working between the stitches, you shouldn't see anything here. It should look just fine. Can't see anything on the front. So we're just going to continue this all the way around. Find that running bar or the head of a stitch if you want to grab the head of the stitch right there. And then underneath that stitch, just like that, pull it through. Once you've finished sewing down that folded hem, the last step is to weave in the ends. Weave in the end along that folded hem, and then weave in the end down at your cast on edge. That's all that's left, and then you can wash your socks and they're ready to wear. And while you're knitting that second sock, why not continue hanging out with me? I'm going to put a playlist right here with some other videos all about sock knitting process, how to care for your socks, how to choose the right yarn, so many topics that we cover in this playlist. So click right there, and I'll see you in the next video.